So what has happened is that they have this complete colonial hangover that has remained with them. It is that particular 18th century mentality, the one that comes from their colonial power. You will still be able to see that very clearly. And if you look at the UK specifically, you will find that in a much greater proportion than you would find in any American, there is a certain feeling of racist superiority. You will clearly be able to perceive it in their tone and in the way they speak to you. And this is, you know, this is something which is coming directly from the 18th century colonial mindset, primarily because they used to have all of those colonies over which they were ruling. Their entire colonial power as it existed was present in the African continent, and it was also in the Indian continent, in various parts of Asia. And even considering the way they so brutally exploited the Chinese people, they did not even spare the South American continent. And when it comes to the US, Canada, and Australia, you already know that they themselves are the descendants and they are the settlers over the native people. So the manner in which they tortured the native people, they decimated them. And then as whites and now as white European settlers, they themselves say that this is our country, right? So the way their entire history has been one of takeover, we can still see its colonial hangover in all of their speeches today, and especially after the Second World War. You are aware that all the international bodies that were subsequently formed, a Western template was simply pasted onto all of them, and those bodies were given this specific task, whether you want to call it the United Nations or the World Bank, the IMF, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization. A Western template was simply pasted everywhere as something that is the most ideal or a standard way which absolutely should be copied by the entire world. Because in the history of the West, the colonial looting that took place, that was their one and only golden period. This was their golden period. There has been no other golden period in their history. They do not have any other history to speak of. It is like a just born infant kind of a thing. And that colonial supremacy, which they managed to achieve through brutal force, there is a sense of arrogance. It has become a deep seated arrogance. And wherever they go, it is not just that they have created these international bodies that have this Western template, but also in all the erstwhile colonies, from the constitutions all the way to the legal framework and even to the institutional framework. In every single thing, a Western template has been pasted. So, as you know, if I were to give you an example from the Indian subcontinent, this was a population whose literacy rate was as high as 85%. And then suddenly you came along and imposed the English language in a single stroke. And on the very next day, the entire country becomes illiterate all of a sudden. In a single stroke, all of them became illiterate. So you can begin to understand the kind of lunacy we are talking about. And you can see the kind of ridiculous imposition of a purely Western template. And this has not just happened here. If you were to pick up and look at any policy document from the UN, you will see it everywhere. For instance, if there is any talk of rights, because this entire Western template has been constructed for a rights-based society. So you see, this entire structure is built on the basis of a victimhood mentality, which is precisely why Americans still carry guns today. Those guns are not just kept around for nothing. The thought process behind it is that it will be useful to use against the state, right? That is the primary thought process for having them. So what you have is a society that is built entirely according to a victimhood mentality. It is a society which has no real cultural or civilizational background. These are not what you would call civilizational countries. All right, so these societies, which were essentially formed in a very primitive way, and then became colonial powers in some century by using their brute force. We are still seeing the hangover of that today. And it is not just that. They have gone and written the history of all their erstwhile colonies themselves. What this means is the very people who ruled were the ones who also influenced the writing of history. And they are trying to say that the world itself began with the West. It is that kind of an 18th century vision that has been fitted like a pair of glasses onto all of the colonies. This is what we call the colonization of minds, where your country, yes, the country has become independent, but even to this day, that colonial torture, its mental effect is still very much on you. That in everything, in every single thing you do, you consider a Western template as the ideal, and you consider the West as being modern. And there is a very, in today's day and age, when we see that the economies of the US and the UK and all the Western economies, including other European countries, when the eventual downfall of all these economies, now that it has finally started to happen, because for 350 years they were able to get by on the loot, what they looted from India, what they looted from the colonies. It was on that very basis that they built Canada, Australia, and the US by exporting all of those savings from Britain. So for a full 350 years, that entire spending spree went on. And in the last 50 years, by imposing the reserve currency formula, they managed to run their economies by simply passing their bills to the rest of the world. They made the rest of the world pay for their expenses with this reserve currency format. And now, at long last, when countries in Asia and the Gulf are finally opposing it, saying we are not going to use it, we are going to move towards de-dollarization. So it is only now that their economic downfall has truly begun. Because now finally, they have to stand on their own 2 feet and earn for themselves. And that is precisely the kind of economic downfall it is moving towards. But even in spite of this, their eyes are not opening to the reality because their entire governance structure was specifically created by them to rule over other colonies and other countries. It is a system which they still have not unwound yet. Okay, so for all of these many years, the colonial power that they used to have, in order to equip that power, their entire governance structure was designed according to that, which is exactly why you see that today, if you take India's economic or political criminals, or for that matter, from anywhere else in the world, you will always find that they are hiding out in the West. Yes, they flee from all these countries and take refuge right there. Whether it happens to be Vijay Mallya or Nirav Modi, it does not matter if they are economic gangsters or political gangsters. For example, you have Nawaz Sharif. Okay, take the example of Ayatollah Khomeini from Iran, who used to live in France. So all of these Western countries have created a whole. They have managed to spread this particular kind of filth even within their diplomacy by gathering together all the criminals from around the world, empowering them, and then from that position, they use these very criminals in a way as a kind of bargaining chip for their negotiations. This is the kind of short-sighted and what else can you call it? A cunning formula for diplomacy, right? Uh, uh, so this entire situation is just completely and utterly childish, and sometimes I honestly just have to laugh looking at them. You see that statement that came from Liz Truss? She was speaking somewhere recently, and she is going on about what kind of government the Chinese people ought to have. It should be a democratic government. Now, in her UK, there is no guarantee for the supply of tomatoes and cucumbers. And she is telling what kind of government the Chinese people should have. I mean, it has become so ridiculous. Sometimes you really just have to laugh when you look at them, that they are in complete disarray and they are trying to advise others on how their government should be. So it is like they have contracted this disease, a kind of colonial hangover that simply is not going away, right? And you will also see that even in the US, when it comes to White House statements, there have been many statements. There has been some improvement recently, but otherwise, some people from the US State Department, some of their women employees, the kind of comments they would always pass on human rights and this and that, and we are concerned about this, we are concerned about that. There is a gas leak in their own Ohio, they cannot handle that, and they are going and giving advice to others. So the whole thing has become like a complete laughing stock. Now in the US, you can see a little bit of improvement, especially, under this current administration. A little bit of improvement is visible compared to what was there in the previous one. But As for Europe, it is completely over. I mean, economically, it has been disbanded with this Ukraine conflict. Their complete deindustrialization has happened, and despite that, their arrogance is not going anywhere. A lot of, I mean, whatever population we have in our urban cities, you see, is very much influenced by this Western template. And the particular reason for being influenced by the Western template is precisely because uh, the job oriented lifestyle that was previously in Asia, you know, was not looked upon as something ideal, uh, because the society of Asia was an enterprising society, the business minded, the self employment model, that kind of thing. Okay, a society that believes in that. So the colonials came and set up this British classroom system. And that British classroom system, it is nothing but the feminization of men. So because of this, for those 15 to 20 years that a person gets stuck inside four walls, the little kid, okay, by completely finishing his curiosity and everything, the thing that he is not good at, making him focus on that memory based classroom model, and then after wasting 15 to 20 years in it, he has no option left to take the risk of doing something enterprising. And a whole human trafficking system runs from classrooms to companies for jobs. Okay, this came from 18th century industrialization. It came from the need to run factories in Europe by stealing raw materials and minerals and all this from the colonies, by exporting to Europe and producing 1,000 times more in European industry. And then the 18th century model of making a profit by selling it, from that this uh, job system was born, which is why you will see that all the urban Indian areas have a massive Western influence. They think that the Western lifestyle is a better lifestyle. Now, how many of them know that the Western lifestyle is sponsored by the reserve currency format of the dollar? So the weekend offs that Americans are taking are from our pockets. Europe also has a 20% reserve currency status. So the Europeans who are taking a week off on the weekend or are touring, or the benefits that the government is giving them, like income security, it is possible it is happening from our pockets. So these people don't know this. They are admiring that lifestyle, but they don't know that it is being sponsored from their own pockets. Okay. So this whole Western lifestyle format will fall when the Western economy will face reality, which is this fall of this fiat reserve currency dollar. When this de-dollarization is complete, you will see that many IT sectors is going to have a massive impact. The service sector was also born out of the fiat dollar. You should know this as well. So a great many unwanted jobs within the service sector are also going to disappear. And once all these jobs have vanished, the immediate question that is going to come up is, well then, for 15 to 20 years, why are they kept sitting in this British classroom? If you are going to make them sit like this for 15 to 20 years inside four walls, our children are being artificially and systematically kept far away from the realities of the market. So then what is the justification for it? If even after a whole 10 years, you are not going to get any commitment of a job after coming out of that system. So the immediate question is going to be exactly this. So coloniality, you have to understand that this is not just simply about the fact that they left on Independence Day and that is all there is to it. No, this whole format that the world is living in right now, it is a Western format. And this system will not go away until the Western economies are forced to face reality. Once the Western economies are finally going to face those realities, which is inevitably going to come along with this de-dollarization process, and only then will people, even in the urban areas of India, finally understand why it is so important to have an enterprising attitude towards life, right? The kids do not know their 15 to 20 years are spent inside the four walls of such a classroom. A system which the British had originally envisaged for the simple reason that they wanted slaves who would not ask any questions. That is precisely why they brought this format. They wanted to groom people across all the colonies in such a way that nobody would even think of independence, so that no one would even get the time to think about it. And they would remain under the complete control of their employer for 10 to 12 hours every day. So they brought this format for that reason. But unfortunately, it became the education format of the world. So when this entire structure of the Western economies, this whole framework, when it finally falls, when it completely collapses, that is when the question will arise that this classroom system has absolutely no meaning whatsoever. This system that packs you inside four walls for 15 to 20 years and then gives you some marks based entirely on your memory over a 3-hour exam, something which has absolutely no market relevance. In terms of what is the market going to do with your memory? Absolutely nothing, right? So this is how, the entire structure is actually based, and it is a very hollow structure, and this structure is absolutely going to fall, because there is no possibility at all that all of those ultra glorified jobs will be able to survive once the fiat reserve currency, the dollar's endless printing, finally comes to a stop. So there are going to be a great many challenges for the world in this decade. It is going to be a very tumultuous ride for the entire world.